Chapter 15 was a pretty funny chapter. So at the beginning of the chapter, Harry wakes up earlier than everybody else and goes and buries Moody's eye that Umbridge had in her door. He goes and buries it next to like a really old tree, and then he goes back to the group and they decide they shouldn't stay in one place for too long, so they apparate to another an outskirts of like a small town. And so Harry is kind of going to the town to look for food, and he felt a familiar chill, like something he's very used to, and this was the chill of Dementors. So obviously he ran back, but the one thing that was pretty alarming was that he wasn't able to produce a Patronus. Everyone also always, blah, everyone found this a little suspect because obviously Harry is one of the best people to do Patronuses. He's been doing them since a very young age, and so this was pretty alarming. Ron went in on him a little bit, and Ron's gonna be doing that a lot this chapter. And so Ron and Harry going back and forth, and now Harry wasn't able to produce a Patronus, and Ron was complaining because he was hungry. And at that point, Hermione, it clicked during Hermione when they were getting really angry with each other, and she was like, "Oh." And then she says, "Give me give me not the Patronus, give me the locket." And so she took it off of Harry, and he instantly felt better, like more warm. And then he realized it was the locket that was like, doing this and making them like irritable and all that stuff. And at that point, they decided no one person would be wearing the locket too long. So I think they decided on 12 hours for each person to wear the locket. And that's how they would go from now on. So now after that, the main task was for them to be able to get food and just figure out what they're going to do next. So as they were getting smaller and smaller meals, Harry was used to this because he was damn near like starved by the Dursleys. So this wasn't bothering him too much. Ron, on the other hand, was used to like, meals anytime he needed because his mom obviously was always in the kitchen. So he's the one who's being very irritable, and even without the locket, he's being very irritable and annoying, and he's not really pitching in as well like the others. Like obviously Harry's doing his own thing and Hermione's being Hermione, but Ron is kind of like left out in this sense. All he cares about really is food, and that becomes very evident in this chapter. So next was just trying to decide what to do next. They were just trying to think of where they could go to look for more of the Horcruxes. They thought about Borgin and Burke's. They thought about Voldemort's old orphanage. They thought about Albania, and also Harry was really adamant on going to Hogwarts. He really thought that maybe Voldemort had left maybe another Horcrux there at Hogwarts, but everybody else really shot it down, saying, why would he leave that there? Because Dumbledore's there, and he came there to teach, but he never got the job because Dumbledore denied him. So then they just shut that down, and they decided on going checking out the orphanage. Hermione tried to look up, where the orphanage was, find some information about it, and then they kind of dropped that idea. Things was kind of getting more dire on the other end because, again, Ron wanted food, and he was being irritable without the locket and with the locket, so it wasn't really helpful. And as we're talking about Voldemort, obviously Harry's scar started to hurt him a little bit, and he kept seeing what Voldemort was thinking about, and Ron would ask him, what's he looking at? And at this point, Voldemort was looking at or thinking of the face of the thief that he saw in Grigorovich's memories, and he was still trying to find that person. Obviously, hadn't found the person yet. And Harry had begun to suspect that Ron and Hermione were talking about him behind their back, mostly because they were kind of going around aimlessly and they didn't really seem to have a set thing they were doing. They were kind of just going from location to location, looking for food, and then not really doing anything else. And Ron complained the most about this. He's like, we're not doing anything. And he talked about his mom, like, she can make food out of thin air. And then Hermione popped in. It's like, she can't make food out of thin air. It needs something to make food out of. And basically, she told Ron, you go make the food, because she's been the one handling the food and majority of everything, supplies wise. And at the time they were about to start arguing, Harry shut everybody up because he heard voices, and they went really quiet. And then they were listening, and they did hear voices. So Hermione pulled out the eavesdropping ears that Fred and George made, and they all listened. They heard the voices clearly. It turned out to be, I believe it was 2 or 3 goblins, and they were talking. And then they heard some human voices as well, and those human voices turned out to be none other than Mr. Tonks and then Dean from Hogwarts. I don't know, interesting group for them all to be together, but they were out on the outskirts in the land looking for food, and they were just discussing some news. So they talked about the fact that the goblins had not joined Voldemort's side, and it was like a myth that they joined Voldemort's side. And also the fact that the sword of Gryffindor, so Ginny and Neville and Luna apparently tried to steal it from Snape's office, and they failed. And Snape disciplined them by sending them off with Hagrid to do some work in Forbidden Forest, which Harry was happy to hear about, because that means he didn't hurt them. And also, since they took the sword, and then he gave the sword to Voldemort, and they put the sword in Gringotts. Now, the goblins were very amused by this, because they revealed that the sword that was there had been a fake the whole time, and the real sword is somewhere else in a disclosed location that nobody knows where it is. So at that, and they talked about obviously Harry and that he's vanished and all that stuff. And then obviously they were happy with Ginny, because the Weasleys already had some things happen to them, and they heard that information. And Hermione and Harry were really happy to hear this. Ron had ducked off into the tent because he was like over the conversation, but they did not notice at the time. So Harry and Hermione pulled out the portrait of Phineas from her bag, and then she obscured his vision so he couldn't see where they were. And they asked him, like, because his portrait is right above the sword, so they asked him where the last place the sword had been. And he, obviously being Phineas, a little bit rude to them, and he let them know that the sword was last time he saw the sword was when Dumbledore used it to destroy a ring. So that right there just lets them know that the sword can be used to destroy a Horcrux, and that they just need to find the sword in order to destroy the Horcrux that they have. And they were happy about this news, but Ron was not, because obviously he's like, so there's something that we have to look for, something else we have to look for that we don't know where it is. And at this, Harry and Ron kind of went back and forth at each other. And Harry basically says, you should have known what you were signing up for when you decided to join me on this mission. And Ron also reveals that they had been talking about Harry behind his back, and saying that he is not being a good leader, and he doesn't know what he's doing, which is true, because Dumbledore didn't really tell him a whole lot. But basically they go back and forth, and Ron ends up leaving. But before that, they end up firing spells at each other, and Ron leaves, leaving Harry and Hermione alone, because Hermione decides to stay because she is staying loyal to the mission. What a crazy chapter.